advice about things. Yeah, that's what I don't know about. That's my general policy. Hey, welcome back. All right, you guys. I went to Chicago. My sister-in-law. Go and hang out with him. I heard there's a long line outside. I don't want to start with it's traditional to wear a talit, so if you have a talit on, great. If you don't and you want to get one, there are available outside, I think, right? Yeah, okay. On the outside. We'll start in a few minutes. I think there's a line outside, so we'll give everyone a few moments to get in. Shana Tova, how are you? I'm sorry. Sometimes I get questions that I don't want to push off to you. I don't want like I don't. Sure, it's always a yeah. No, no, no. I don't. But I apologize. Okay, we're good. We're clear. I was in Chicago. Nice to see you. My sister-in-law, brother, so I know a lot of people there. It's great. I was Chicago. Yeah, everybody knows me. I like Toronto. I don't know if it. I also know how far there. I have like a place also in place to stay. It's close by. Yeah, let's see. Dina, when do you think we should start? No, just like the just like the ball on it. Normally, do we want to leave you guys on? Huh? Yeah. You're not allowed. Hey, welcome. How are you?
Let's fill up a bike for you.
Oh, yeah. It's not gonna happen. I'm leaving up to Tuesday already. It is.
Right today.
Yeah.
Do you know where Nidre is?
No.
We have like along the lake there's a nuclear plant.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 50 kilometers east of here.
Oh, nice. You rode there and back?
Yeah.
Oh,
These
nice.
guys was
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's a beautiful day. Yeah, I really miss. As soon as I get back, I land on Wednesday. Definitely Friday morning. Perfect.
We're going to start in a few minutes. Gemar Tov, everyone. We're just waiting for the line outside to trickle down. Next year, we'll have a better system implemented. It's not.
So there's a big line. Do you guys mind if we wait? Isn't like a big lineup outside? You don't mind another 5 minutes? You're okay? All right. I don't want people, No, I'm fine. We're only going to do, in the traditional service, they do 3 times Kol Nidre, and we're going to do it once. So I don't want people to miss Kol Nidre completely. So I want to give them another couple minutes. So hang tight. Thank you for patience. And there's, I guess, a line because of the security, which is justified. So. We are going to need 2 volunteers to hold the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, while Sammy does the Kol Nidre. So maybe we can warm up. Any volunteer? 1, and you don't have to do anything. You just have to stand there, but don't pass out. That's the number 1 job. I've seen that actually happen. So hopefully that won't happen tonight. Any other I hope I didn't scare anyone, but. The rule is people have to volunteer, so you can volunteer. Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'll give you a few minutes, but. Yeah. All right, welcome back, everyone. I think we're going to start in a moment. Does everyone have a booklet? Yeah. So the reason I'm like, they were just a word about the microphone. I on Shabbat and Yom Tov, I don't like hold a microphone, so I don't want to walk around with a microphone. But the people who are watching on live stream wanted to hear better, so we compromised. I would prefer not to stand up there. I feel more close to everyone standing over here. So we compromised. But it means that I won't be walking around. If you see me walking around, say, Josh, you're walking around. You can't do that anymore. And I will move back to the microphone. We're going to start tonight straight away with Kol Nidre. And then we're going to do a little bit of learning and explanation about what Kol Nidre is. And we're only going to do, in the traditional service, they repeat the Kol Nidre 3 times. We're going to do it 1 time. This will leave us more opportunity to learn a little bit about what Kol Nidre is. So my 2 volunteers, come on up, and we're going to open the Ark. You guys can open the Ark too. And we're going to rise for the Kol Nidre. It's on page 33 of these booklets. Stand on his side. Just be careful. Don't fall.
I think they can be here now. Doesn't matter, does it?
That's good.
Ready? Beshiva shel mala uvishiva shel mata al dat amakom ve'al dat akal anu matirin lehitpalel im havaryanim.
Let's read together in the English in the middle on page 33. In a convocation of the heavenly court and a convocation of the lower court, with the consent of the divine and consent of this congregation, we hereby grant permission to pray with transgressors.
Kol Nidre ve'esarei v'charamei ve'konamei v'chinuyei v'kinusei ha'dinedarna udeishtevana udeyacharimna udeasarna al nafshatana miyom kippurim zeh ad yom kippurim haba aleinu haba aleinu haba aleinu letova bechol hon yicharatna vehon kol hon yehon sharon shevi Shevikin Shevitin Betelin Umevutalin La Sheririn Vela Kayamin Nidrana Nidrana Lo Nidre Veyesarana La Esare Ushevuatana Ushevuatana La Shevuot.
Page 34. Let's read together. We're going to read these two pieces, a few of these pieces in the Hebrew, and then we'll read them in the English. You have the translation and the transliteration there to help you. Let's read together first in the Hebrew and then in the English. V'nisrach lechol adat b'nei Yisrael v'rager hagar b'tocham ki lechol ha'am bishgaga. The entire congregation of the people of Israel shall be forgiven, as well as the stranger who dwells among them, for all have erred. Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh kegodel chastecha, v'kasher nasata la'am hazeh mimitzrayim v'ad hena, v'sham ne'amar. Please pardon the sins of this nation in accordance with the greatness of your loving kindness, and as you forgave this people from when it left Mitzrayim until now. And there it is said, we're going to say this 3 times, in Hebrew and then in English. Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha. Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha. Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha. And Adonai said, I have pardoned them as you have asked. And Adonai said, I have pardoned them as you have asked. And Adonai said, I have pardoned them as you have asked. And we're going to do the Shechianu together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Okay, we're going to put the Torahs away.
Shkaya.
All right, everyone can sit down for a few minutes. So first, I think probably most of you were here last week, but if you weren't, let me just explain. The purpose of this minyan is really for it to be participatory, for you to have a chance to learn about what we're doing, to talk about the meaning, to ask questions, and also to have a flavor of the traditional service. That's why I've preserved a lot of the Hebrew, so that it feels that, and we are doing a traditional service, but we're also understanding better what we're doing. And I'm happy to answer questions about what we're doing and the meaning and why we do things certain ways. And I want to make this today and tomorrow an enjoyable experience, something that you can really grow from and learn about what we're doing. Kol Nidre is probably one of the most famous services. It's the only service really that has its name based on one prayer. And yet we're going to look a little bit about what Kol Nidre is, and it's a bit weird because I think the tune and the song are so haunting and so familiar and so beautiful that it's almost as if the music overwhelms what we're actually saying. Some of you probably seen movies, The Jazz Singer, right? That's a little bit old, but it's a famous scene with Neil Diamond singing the Kol Nidre. And the tune is really one of the most famous tunes in all of the prayers. But the meaning of it is a little strange, and I want to try to explain it and make it a little bit meaningful to translate it into our experience. So I want to look at a text on page 34. Right? Kol Nidre is basically a statement where we pre-annul our vows. Basically, this beautiful tune that maybe contributes to our spirituality is in a weird way saying, like, everything we promised to do next year, we might not do it, which, like, that's a little weird to start the year that way. It's both a little troubling, but I think also very beautiful. But I want to look a little bit about the history, and then I'm happy to answer questions about the Kol Nidre as best I can. So let's look in the bottom of page 34. Vows, right, are something taken very seriously in Judaism and probably in all sorts of cultures. Today it would be akin to perjury. Right? If you perjure yourself in court, you can go to jail for perjuring yourself. And when you make a vow in Judaism, according to Jewish law, you really have to observe that vow. It's not exactly the same as perjury because that's only about testimony, although Jewish law does have a vow concerning testimony. But it's a broader use of a vow. A vow might be just a way of promising that you're going to do something, but it has weight, and people believe that if they didn't keep their vows, bad things would happen to them. That was a very important belief in the ancient world. We might not believe like literally in divine punishment, but somebody who constantly says they're going to do something and says it in a very affirmative way and doesn't do that, that's also a problematic way of behaving in our world. So I want to look a little bit about this process of annulling vows, which is weird. So let's look at this Mishnah on the bottom of page 34. The Mishnah, again, is the earliest text of Jewish law, and there is an entire tractate, meaning a book, about vows. They were a very important part of ancient religion. Jews, for the record, for probably about 1,000 years, Jews have sort of like, don't ever take a vow, maybe for 2,000 years. Like, you can promise to do something, but try not to use the word vow, because if you don't keep it, then that's really bad. So better to say something like, I promise to do something without a vow. This way, you're not transgressing a vow. Okay, but in the ancient world, people did take vows. So let's look at that Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, even one who wants to take a vow prohibiting another from benefiting from him, but only in order that he should eat with him. Now, this is hard language. What is that talking about? So one thing that, one way of using a vow would be to spur yourself on to do something. So you would say something like this. It sounds a little weird in our language, but you would say something like this. If this person doesn't come and have dinner with me next week, then today you might say, I'm never going to talk to him again. Now, we probably don't mean that, right? But even I think in today, you might occasionally say something because you want to get something else done. You say, I don't know, if I don't go to do something today, then this bad thing's going to happen to me, or I'm going to never, I don't know, eat chocolate again or something like that. But you don't really not want to eat chocolate again for the rest of your life. You just want to make sure that you do that thing. So that was a common way of people sort of I'm trying to think of what the equivalent today might be. It might be putting up a social media post. Or again, sorry to keep using running analogies, you might put up a post on social media that you signed up for a 5K run and it's in 3 months. And now if you don't do it, it's going to look bad because you told everyone in the world that you're going to do that. So that's a little bit what has happened over here. But the person, he doesn't really, in the story here in this mission, he doesn't really want to not allow that other person to benefit from it. He doesn't want to break the relationship. He's just trying to get that person to come to his house and have dinner. Okay. So he only says that not intending to take an actual vow. So what does he do? He should say it to him at the outset. Any vow that I take in the future is void, which is weird, right? It's weird to say pre-void your vows. And this statement is effected provided that he remembers at the time of the vow that his intent at the beginning of the year was to render it void. Okay, it's complicated, this mechanism, but I want to just maybe look one more text at it and then talk a little bit of how that got to be in the Kol Nidre. So in the Babylonian Talmud, the second text on page 35, we also, the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah, right, and it adds in the following. And in addition, one who desires that his vows not be upheld for the entire year should stand up in Rosh Hashanah and say, any vow that I take in the future should be void. And this statement is effected, provided that he remembers at the time of the vow that his intent at the beginning of the year was to render it void. Going on a little bit, Rav Huna bar Chinana, a later rabbi, intended to teach this topic at the festival lecture, meaning he wanted to tell everybody, this is what you do. You pre-void your vows, so that everyone learned this manner of rendering vows void on Rosh Hashanah. Rava, another rabbi, said to him, the Tana, meaning the rabbi of the Mishnah, conceals it. He didn't put it in the Mishnah and does not say it explicitly, despite the fact that it is studied by Torah scholars, in order that the public not treat vows lightly, and you teach it publicly at the festival lecture. Meaning we have this mechanism, the second rabbi here is saying, we have this mechanism to pre-void our vows. It's something that's good on the one hand, because it sort of lets us off the hook beforehand, but also it has a negative side, right? We want people to keep their promises. I think when we think about it rationally, we want people to keep their promises, but not pay too stiff of a price for failure, right? At least, speaking about myself, when I make a promise to do something, usually I intend to do it. Usually I do it. I want to do it. I usually promise to do something with good intent, and it's a valuable thing. It's usually good. But on the other hand, if I fail, I don't want cataclysmic consequences to happen to me or to anyone I know. If my children say they're promising to do something and they fail to do it, I kind of want them to feel bad, but not too bad. Right? I don't want them to feel that it's horrible and I don't love them anymore, or that they've done something terrible. So that's kind of that's what Kol Nidre is. At a certain point in Jewish history, it sort of became ritualized, and it became the introduction to Yom Kippur. It got into the service probably over 1,000 years ago, and it's hard. We don't know exactly why. It's one of these prayers that got into the liturgy a long time ago, and why did it happen that way? We're not 100% sure. But they've spoken about it already for well over 1,000 years. And once I think that the combination with the tune sort of solidified it. There were actually rabbis over the generations who tried to get rid of it, right? There were even some anti-Semitic claims based on the Kol Nidre. They said, look, Jews get up every year in their synagogues and they say, we're not going to keep our promises, which means Jews are not trustworthy. Now, I don't read the prayer that way. I think that's an anti-Semitic claim. I don't think there's a people in the world that's more trustworthy than other people, right? There's no such thing as like a nation that's trustworthy and a nation that's not trustworthy. We're all, hopefully, sometimes trustworthy, and we all fail at living up to our promises. To me, when I think about Kol Nidre, I think a little bit, we'll talk about this theme as we go along, I think a little bit about trying to do the best I can, but not beating myself up too much for not doing the best I can, and sort of giving myself, letting myself a little bit off the hook already at the beginning of the year, but not going so far as to say that anything I promise to do, I shouldn't take it seriously, because that's just not the way I read the prayer. I read the prayer as a default. Right? We should try to live up to what we're trying to do, but we don't want to face terrible consequences. Does that make some sense to people? Yeah? Are there any questions? Yeah. Can't walk around.
First of all, just like acknowledging the fact that I am no scholar. Okay? When I read the Kol Nidre, right?
Yeah.
The translation, when we took the vow and next year,
Yeah.
Yom Kippur, we're declaring them void,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Not ones that we're going to vow.
Yeah.
Like my interpretation, we're kind of cleaning it up. We're declaring it void because the holiday is just begun. We have the Day of Atonement coming up
Right.
now. We're gonna restore our integrity, so to speak, so that when we make a new promise or a new vow, it's coming from a clean place. We're restored, so that vow has power. We're restoring ourselves. That's how I interpret it. This is like whatever I said like yesterday between that promise to do between now and next year. What we're saying right now is, I'm declaring that void because I haven't gone through the
Uh-huh. Okay. I have to think about it. Interesting. There is a lot of tension in medieval literature. There's a big argument about whether this works for vows going forward or vows going backwards. Right? Technically speaking, the text seems to work on vows going forward, but how do you annul something that you haven't done yet is a little bit weird, right? So there were rabbis in the Middle Ages who tried to change, and there actually are various versions that some say both backwards and forwards, some say only backwards, and some say only forwards. The text that we're using here is one going forward, but I'm just trying to think about the connection between the past vows and future vows. Yeah.
I'm only looking at the line here which says, which we have vowed. Which we have vowed.
Yeah.
Or declared. We have done up until this point.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
which we will, which we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good point. I don't have like an easy solution for it. It's a good point because I think in this version of the Kol Nidre, there's a tension between the past and the future. In a technical sense, the rabbis have a mechanism for annulling vows or for releasing people from vows. People made hasty vows, right? That just seems to be what people did a lot. They would shoot their mouths off and make a hasty vow, right? People have tempers, right? I don't think this is anything new, right? And I mean, hopefully you never say this to your family, but it's been known to happen. I don't want to ever see you again, or I don't want to ever talk to you again. That's extreme, right? Or I'm not coming to your bar mitzvah, or your wedding, or something like that. And you cool down, and you don't want to live by that. That is the normal mechanism. The normal mechanism is you would go to it's kind of like a judge, but a rabbi, and the rabbi would say, "Did you really mean that in your heart?" And you would say, "No. Had I known that I would change my mind after a day or whatever amount of time, I wouldn't have made that vow." And the rabbi would say, "Okay, you don't have to keep that vow." This formula seems to have mostly been used for things that people didn't always remember. Right? What if you come to the end of the year and you've made dozens of such vows and you don't remember them? So you could annul them in the past so that you don't pay the consequences going forward, but also sort of pre-annulling them. So I realize the confusion there, but thank you. Other questions about the Kol Nidre? Yeah. Why do we say it three times? So also remind me to repeat the questions so the people listening in can hear. The answer is I don't know. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of formulas that are just repeated three times for emphasis. It's like reminds me a little of Wizard of Oz, right? When she's got to click the feet a few times, right? I think she does it three times, right? So I just think that that's just sort of like the nature of ritual. Sometimes when things are ritualized, you do them three times to make them sort of feel more like a ritual. And that's important to realize. Kol Nidre is, by ritual, what I mean is like you don't make it up every time you want to do it. You have a text and you read it, and you're not shooting from the hip. You just say what the text says. That's the nature of things that go on in the synagogue also. When we talk to each other, we don't follow formulas. We speak naturally. But when you go to formal situations like a court or a police officer, I don't know what the rules are here in Canada, but in America you have to read the Miranda rights, and they read a text, and it's formulaic. They might mean it, but they have to fill in all those texts. So I think this is the nature of three times. Yeah, there were, like I said, there were rabbis who wanted to get rid of it, but it's really a very popular. I mean, I can't imagine coming to Kol Nidre services without doing Kol Nidre.
Could it have anything to do with people that were hard of hearing or couldn't hear the words of the rabbi? If they didn't have hearing aids, they didn't have microphones, and they just wanted to make sure.
Oh, so 3 times was better, maybe. The question was, could it be 3 times for hard of hearing? And you got a good joke. Thank you. I don't know. I don't know what people did in the ancient, where there was no microphones, and people probably lost their hearing the same way they do in the modern world. And so I think that they probably, my guess is, if you couldn't hear it the first time, you might not have been able to hear it the 3rd time. So I'm not sure how much, it's like when you can't hear someone and someone says it again and again and you still can't hear them, it doesn't help so much. But maybe, it could be. Yeah.
Does that have anything to do, those vows, anything to do with marriages or commitment to marriages or relationships, or is that not part of Kol Nidre?
You want to know if you can get out of your marriage vows on Kol Nidre? Yeah. No, you can't get out of your marriage vows on Kol Nidre. It technically speaking, in a technical legal sense, a marriage is. I know that in English we use the word take vows, but that's not a Hebrew word. You don't go through a vow process, and the only way to get out of marriage is divorce. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. I hope that helped you understand a little bit about the Kol Nidre. Again, I think that its power isn't just in its words. Sometimes the power from something is in the song. You might like music and not care, and you have been listening to a song for your whole life, and you love it and it moves you, and you don't know what the words mean. Right? There's a lot of bands and music that I love, and were someone to say, like, the words are gibberish. It doesn't matter. It's somehow the tune moves me. And I think that's part of the power of Kol Nidre. It's not just the meaning of the words. It's also the fact that we begin Yom Kippur every year with it. Okay, we are going to move on. I wanted to read one more thing. I know I've been talking a long time, but page 36, this phrase that begins about praying with sinners. Again, this is a theme we're going to come to a lot. It's a passage from the Babylonian Talmud. Rav Chana Bar Bizna says in the middle of the page, that Rabbi Shimon Chasida says, any fast that does not include the participation of some of the sinners of the Jewish people is not a fast. As the smell of galbanum, this is an ingredient in the incense, is foul, and yet the verse lists it with the ingredients of the incense. Abaye says it is derived from here. It is he who builds his upper chambers in the heavens and has established his bundle on the earth. When the people are united as a bundle, including their sinners, they are established upon the earth. And I think it's an important message on Yom Kippur, is that we all pray together, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done in the past year. Right? We come together, and the participation of everybody, and by this I mean, my guess is that there aren't really horrible sinners here. I mean, you might have done some small sins here and there, and I'm not going to ask everybody to publicly confess all their sins, but it's unlikely that there are people here who have done really terrible things. Again, I don't know, but I'm guessing. But it is important to be inclusive, right? Yom Kippur is a day of deep, deep forgiveness and tolerance and understanding, not just small little things, but big things as well. And that's hard. And we begin, the first thing that Sammy had sang was a declaration that we're here together as a community to pray as a community, no matter who we are, no matter what we do. We're all here to pray and join together. And the presence of every single person is important, not just the presence of the saints, and in Hebrew we call them the tzaddikim, the righteous, but the composition of the people of Israel is inclusive of everybody. And we begin Yom Kippur already making that declaration. We're not going to read, there's a beautiful story here that we're just not going to read for time's sake from a teacher of mine. You can read it, or while you're sitting there, or you can I can send it to you afterwards on the internet if we can get mails going out. It's a beautiful story, but I just don't want to take the whole time to read it out loud together.
That's not a sin. A murderer can be present with
Yes. Yeah. I mean, look, technically in Jewish law, a murderer is to be executed, right? There's a capital punishment. We don't do that for many thousands of years, but yes, I don't think that it means, that doesn't mean, look, the statement doesn't mean that there's no such thing as punishment for crimes, right? The statement means that when we gather together, we pray as a community no matter who is there. And I agree with you. It's very easy to be forgiving for people who did small things like, park on my parking spot or something like that, or I don't know, didn't wash the dishes, right? Most of the things that we get angry at each other for are tiny little irritable things, maybe petty crimes at most. But yeah, I think that, if we were open, it's not feasible, but I could imagine a situation where people in prison for horrible crimes could sit and join. It doesn't mean it wouldn't go back to prison afterwards, right? That doesn't negate the role of punishment, but it does mean that even a criminal is part of the people, right? Something to think about in a national sense as well, but I don't want to go into that. Yeah. Okay, we are going to continue on page 38. We're going to do some of the prayers now. We're going to again do the Baruch Hu, the Shema we're going to do together, and then we are going to start the Amida on bottom of page 38. So let's rise together for the Baruch Hu. We'll sit for the Shema, and then we'll stand again for the Amida. Page 38.
Et Adonai Amvorach. Baruch Adonai Amvorach. Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Yotzer Choshech, Oseh Shalom, Shalom, Uvoret Hakol. Okay, you may be seated. We're going to continue with the Shema. The one new thing about the Shema is on Yom Kippur, we say the second line out loud. It's the only day of the year where the Baruch Shem Kavod line gets said out loud, so we'll chant them all together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto, Leolam Vaed, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. All right, we're going to move into the Amidah on page 38. We're going to sing together the Amidah. There is translation on the left and transliteration. I think there's transliteration for the whole thing on the right-hand column interspersed with the Hebrew. But we're only going to do on, at night, there's no Kedusha right, which is what we do during the morning. There's no Kedusha at night, so we'll do the beginning together, and then we're going to continue on to the Sim Shalom. We'll sing together on page 43. Okay, so we'll skip sort of from page, the bottom of page 39 to the Sim Shalom on page 43. Okay, please rise, and we'll join together for the beginning of the meetup with Sammy. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor ve'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Vekonei HaKol Vezocher Chasdei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei V'neihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Zochreinu L'chaim Melech Hafetz B'chaim V'chotzveinu B'sefer HaChaim V'chotzveinu B'sefer HaChaim L'manecha Elohim Chaim Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai Mechai Mitim Atah Rav Leoshia Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayei Meitim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofech Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamocha Bal Gevurot Umido Melach Melech Meimitu Mechaye Umatzmiach Yeshua Michamocha Avarachamim Zocher Yetzurav L'chaim Berachamim V'ne'emanata L'chayot Meitim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMeitim. All right, we're going to go on to page 43. I apologize, there's no transliteration here. But in the middle where it says Sim Shalom, we'll sing together through B'Sefer Chaim. Sim, sim, sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam. Sim, sim, sim shalom tova uvracha. Chein v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha. Barcheinu avinu kulanu ke'echad be'or panecha. Sim, sim, sim shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam. Sim, sim, sim shalom tova uvracha. Ki be'or panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu Torah Chaim ve'ahavat chesed u'tzedakah uvracha v'rachamim v'chaim v'shalom v'shalom sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam sim shalom tova uvracha B'tov beinecha levarech et amecha Yisrael b'chol eit u'b'chol shah b'shlomecha sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam sim shalom Tova uveracha Besefer Chaim bracha v'shalom Ufarnasa tova Nizacher v'nikatev lefanecha Anachnu b'chol amcha Beit Yisrael L'chaim tovim uleshalom Baruch atah Adonai oseh hashalom. Amen. All right, you can sit down. We're going to move on to the next part, the next big thing that we do a lot of on Yom Kippur, and that's called the confessional, which sounds to me, the translation sounds very Christian, and that's part of the problem. Jews, our language is Hebrew, but we live in an English-speaking country. English is predominantly a Christian language. So when we translate things into English, they have, I think for many of us, a very Christian sense. But there are a lot of things that are common between Judaism and Christianity. We have a version of confession that's a little bit different than the Christian version of confession. But I want to look at a couple texts about that, and then we're going to do some of the confessional texts. So actually skip ahead to page 48. I want to show you a little bit. There are two major parts of the service. You might remember from previous years where you sort of put your hand up to your heart. You know this part where you do a lot of that? Okay, that is like a symbol of showing your regret. To be honest, I don't know where that comes from, but generally during the confession, every time you hit a new paragraph, you do a little thump. You don't have to hit. It's not better to hit harder. So it's not a contest. I mean, if you would like to hit yourself really hard, I would discourage it. But I'm not going to tell you not to, but you don't have to. There's no extra points for hitting yourself harder. But I wanted to look at a little bit about the text and about confession. Confession, like a lot of the Jewish practices, originally came from the temple. Right? You would bring an offering, but bringing an offering wasn't enough. You also had to admit and confess and say what you had done wrong. Just bringing an offering isn't sufficient. You need to say what you did wrong and try to get better and try not to do that again. But in a world without a temple, right? We've been living for 2,000 years without animal sacrifice, so we don't bring sacrifices anymore, but we still make those confessions. I want to look a little bit at Maimonides. I'll read you a few. This is, Maimonides lived in the 12th century, and he sort of summarizes the Jewish law, and he writes it. He's probably one of the greatest writers in Jewish history. So I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. It's in the middle of page 48. All of the commandments in the Torah, whether they be positive commandments or negative commandments. Positive commandment is something that you should do, like build a sukkah, listen to the shofar. And a negative commandment is something you don't do, like don't steal, commit adultery, things like that. So it doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative. If a person transgressed any of them, whether he did so intentionally, whether he did so unintentionally and sort of accidentally, when he repents and returns from sinning, he is obligated to confess before God. As it says, when a man or woman does any of the sins of of man, people, sins of human beings, and he shall confess his sin that he committed. This refers to a verbal confession. And confession, that is a positive commandment, meaning you actually are fulfilling a commandment by confessing to something that you had done. So Maimonides goes on. How does he confess? How does a person confess? He says, please God, I have sinned, I have erred, I have willfully but unrebelliously, meaning like you did it, but you're not some great rebel, transgressed. I have done such and such specific sins. I am regretful and ashamed for my actions, and I will never again return to my old ways. This is the essence of confession, and anyone who wants to lengthen his confession, this is praiseworthy. Going on a little bit, anyone who confesses verbally and does not commit in his heart to abandon the thing he did wrong, the sin, this is like a person who immerses in a purity pool while holding an unclean creature in his hand. Right? The image is, right, you go into a mikveh. A mikveh is an immersion pool to become pure, and if you're still holding the object that causes impurity, that's a contradictory action. Right? You can't say something. If you say, I admit the thing I did wrong, but you fully intend to continue to do that in your heart, that just doesn't work, right? Confession isn't just a statement. Confession is a feeling that you verbalize, because verbalizing helps us improve ourselves and not err in the same ways. But it doesn't make any sense to say, I did something wrong and fully intend to do it again. That just doesn't, it's not a real confession. So that the bath is not effective until he sends away the unclean creature. And so it says, one who admits and abandons is given mercy, and he must specify the sin, as it says, this nation has sinned a great sin and made a golden god for themselves. It's a quote from after the golden calf, the episode in the Torah. I think we're not going to read the last paragraph, but I want you to understand like what we do tonight. The real, like a real proper confession, and this is admittedly very hard, would be, and I don't think we're going to do this, but for me or for everyone in the synagogue to get up and stand in front of everyone and say the things that they had actually done wrong. That would be very difficult, I think, and synagogues don't, I've never been in a synagogue that actually does that. It would be difficult for, I think it'd be difficult for all of us to, and it would take a long time. But maybe that might happen in smaller groups. I'm imagining something like various kinds of anonymous groups or people with addictions where it is, I've actually not participated in this, but it does seem to be a very powerful act to admit that you're not perfect in front of other human beings and to actually say it out loud and not just think it in your heart, but actually talk to other people about things in an atmosphere in which people are forgiving and can move on. But that is not happening in synagogues. It's not really going to happen tonight. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you everything I've done wrong, and I'm not asking anybody else to do that because it would be, it's just foreign to our culture. It would be, I think, very difficult for us to do that. But I think it's important to remember that that would be sort of an ideal, right? And maybe you can go home with your partner, your children, your loved ones, people with whom you have a safe relationship with, and maybe not list every single thing for the entire year, but to say, like, might say to my parents, there were times I wasn't there for you. There was a time where I got angry at you for something that I didn't need to. I could have just looked over that. Simple things like that, and say, I'm going to try harder next year. A lot of us do this before Yom Kippur. We say things like, if I've wronged you over the year, please forgive me, which is good, but it can become formulaic, right? When you start sending, WhatsApps to every single person you know, even barely know them. What if I've done anything wrong to you, please forgive me? It becomes a ritual that doesn't have as deep of a meaning. And we live with that, right? We live with the fact that we're just not going to go to every single person and hash out every single problem we've had all year long. But maybe, I wrote to my daughter, there was one episode, I will give you a small confession. One episode, my 14-year-old daughter, where, she always doesn't, she tells me to come pick her up, and I don't know where she is. And then I wander around the city looking for her, and her phone ran out, so I can't find her, and it's frustrating. And so one day I got really angry at her for doing that again, and it was very distressing. She cried a little bit. I wrote to her today. I said, her name is Rakia. I said, Rakia, I'm sorry about that time I got mad at you when I couldn't find you. And, she probably barely remembers it. This wasn't a major thing, but I think that was helpful. All right, and so maybe there are little things like that you can do. In the synagogue, we do a sort of a ritual rendition of that. We basically list in alphabetical order. So we're going to do a little bit of that on page 44. When you have something in the alphabet in Hebrew and then in the alphabetical order in English, right, that means the translation is not exact, right? You can't get alphabetical order from Hebrew and alphabetical order in English to match up. But the idea of following the whole alphabet is just to be like, we completely confess. Okay, so we're going to do on page 44, we'll stand for this. And there's a tune that you might be familiar with. We're going to do it in Hebrew, but if the Hebrew is difficult, I would encourage you to think about the English, and then we're going to, then we'll go on. So let's do together on page 44. Again, it's traditional to sort of lightly tap your chest while you're doing this. Okay. Ay, 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 Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Tofi. Ay, 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 Eviru, Vehirshanu, Zadnu, Chamasnu, Tafalnu Sheker. Ay, 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 Yatsnura, Kizavnu, Latsnu, Maradnu, Niatsnu, Sararnu, Avinu, Pashanu, Sararnu, Kishinu, Oref. Ay, 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 Rashanu, Shichatnu, Tiavnu, Tainu, Titanu. All right, you may be seated. Are there any questions about the Hashamnu, it's called, that prayer? Or about confessional? Any thoughts anyone wants to share? Feel free to. All right, we'll be doing it again tomorrow. So if you have anything you want to add in or anything you have questions about, I'm happy to talk about that tomorrow. I brought on page 45, I had this discussion with some of my students. My other co-teacher at the conservative yeshiva where I teach in Jerusalem talked about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of a time we're supposed to be very deeply self-critical in a very, very deep way, and really sort of turn our attention inward and be extremely self-critical of ourselves, but only during those 10 days. And we had an interesting discussion about the dangers of that. I think he appreciates the dangers. The danger of being beating yourself up is that it's sometimes hard to get out of that mode. People who suffer from depression, people who feel very disappointed in themselves, I think maybe Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur could be a little bit of a dangerous time during the year where we focus so much on how faulty we all are. And that's can be a scary place to go, a dangerous place to go. I think we all have faults. Some of us are just born more self-critical with a tendency to maybe have more of a difficult time in moving past your own faults. I know personally sometimes when I can, focus too much on the things I didn't do well and not enough on the things I did do well. And that's difficult. So what I said in this conversation that we had where I teach was that the questions, the way to think on Yom Kippur is not what's wrong with me. Right? I think that that's a poor way of phrasing something. And I would prefer people, personally, I would prefer people to ask, what can I do better? To focus on actions and not on essential ways of being. Right? It's not helpful, I don't think. And I'm not a professional psychologist, but I know that when I ask the question, what's wrong with me, it doesn't lead to profitable, to good improvement. But when I ask, what can I do better, especially when there are concrete things, when there are things that I can actually improve, not core integral parts of my personality, but more particularly ways of acting, and when I sit and list, well, you may have had difficulty with certain things, but you also did a pretty good job with other things, whatever they may be. I think it's a better way of approaching this intense self-introspection that we go through on Yom Kippur without becoming dangerously depressed. So that's a little bit of my thoughts on. I brought a text here from a teacher from New York, a very well-known rabbi, and I wanted to read it out loud with you because I do think when we do, in Hebrew you call this a cheshbon nefesh. A cheshbon nefesh is a very deep examination of who you are. But a cheshbon nefesh is also for the good things, right? You should also be happy with your accomplishments, the people you treated right, the people that you helped, the accomplishments, especially accomplishments that weren't just for you, but accomplishments that brought better lives to other people. That's part of Yom Kippur too. It's not just, I don't think, about the things you did wrong. It's also taking account of the things you did right. I also firmly believe that by thinking about the things we did right, it spurs us on to do more of them next year. When I had teachers who would give me praise for something I did, I think it made me want to work harder. Right? It never made me want to work less. When a teacher said, I really loved what you wrote, I always would think to myself, oh, I want to do that again. Right? I want to capture that feeling. And so feeling good about who you are is also a good way to improve your life and to make yourself a better person. So let's read that text together. It's on the top of page 45. You don't have to beat your heart for this one because it's good stuff. All right, we'll read it in English. We have loved, we have blessed, we have grown, we have spoken positively, we have raised up, we have shown compassion, we have acted enthusiastically, we have been empathetic, we have cultivated truth, we have given good advice, we have respected, we have learned, we have forgiven, we have comforted, we have been creative, we have stirred, we have been spiritual activists, we have been just, we have longed for Israel, we have been merciful, we have given full effort, we have supported, we have contributed, we have repaired. Okay. In the Hebrew, that is in alphabetical order. In English, it's not. All right, we're going to continue on page 45 with some more prayers. There is part of the liturgy is more like imagining, on bottom of page 45, the El Melech is imagining God's mercy and God forgiving us. Again, the way I read this is that we try to emulate God, and if God can forgive us, then we can also forgive other people. So let's stand up and we'll listen to Sammy and join in when we can on page 45 and page 46.
El melech yoshev al kisei rachamim mitnaheg b'chasidut mochel avonot amo ma'avir rishon marbe mechila lechatayim uslicha lefosheim oseh tzedakot Im kol basar, basar baruach, lo charatam, tigmol, lo charatam, tigmol, eloreita, lanu lom hashlosh esrei, uzcholanu hayom berit shlosh esrei, kemo sheodata le'anav, mi kedem, kemo shekatuv. Vayered Adonai be'anan, v'yatzev imo sham, vayikra v'shem Adonai.
Together in bottom page 45.
Vayavor Adonai al panav, vayikra Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun, erech apayim, v'rav chesed v'yemet, notze chesed lalafim, nose avon v'afesha, v'chata v'nakem, v'salach lavonenu l'chatoteinu, u'nchaltanu.
Let's read it in English on the top where it says, pardon us. Pardon us, our Father, for we have sinned. Forgive us, our King, for we have transgressed. For you, my Master, are good and forgiving, and abounding in kindness to all who call upon you. All right, we're going to continue with page 46 with the Shema Kolenu. You can see here that Sammy will chant in Hebrew, and we repeat after him. The transliteration is there on the right, and the English is there on the left. I need a volunteer to open the ark. Any volunteer? It's not hard. Okay, come on. Thank you.
Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel b'rachamim v'ratzon, et tefilateinu.
Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel barachamim uveratzon et tefilateinu.
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Al tashlichenu milfanecha, v'ruach kodshecha, al tikach mimenu.
Al tashlichenu mirifanecha, v'ruach kodshecha, al tikach mimenu.
Al tashlichenu le'et zikna, kichlot kochenu, al tazvenu.
Al tashlichenu le'et zikna, kichlot kochenu, al ta'azvenu.
Al tazvenu Adonai Eloheinu, al tirchak mimenu.
Al ta'azvenu Adonai Eloheinu, al tirchach mimenu. All right, we can close the ark, and then you can be seated. We're going to continue on page 47. There's another beautiful melody. You have the translation, we have the Hebrew and the transliteration. The song is a lot about the unity and the bond between God and the people of Israel. It might be a tune that's familiar to many of you, so I would encourage you to join along.
Ki anu amecha ve'ata Eloheinu, anu vanecha ve'ata avinu, anu avadecha ve'ata Adonenu, anu kehalecha ve'ata chelkeinu, anu nachalatecha ve'ata goraleinu, anu tzonecha ve'ata ro'einu, anu chamecha ve'ata notreinu, anu filatecha ve'ata yotzreinu, anu rayatecha ve'ata dodeinu, anu segulatecha ve'ata Eloheinu, anu amecha ve'ata malkeinu, anu mamirecha ve'ata mamireinu. All right, we are going to move to page 48. There's one more text that I want to read, probably our last little bit of text learning. It's really one of my favorite texts. Many of you know, besides being a rabbi, I also study and teach, did a PhD in the university, and we studied a lot of Jewish history. And one of the great crises of the Jewish people in Jewish history, we've had no shortage of crises, was the destruction of the temple. The temple was really the focus of Judaism until the year 70 CE, which was when the last temple stood. And Judaism was basically, it's hard for us to imagine, but was a religion based on worship in Jerusalem in the temple. And when it was destroyed, there was a real crisis. How do we go on? How do we relate to God without a temple? I mean, you have to think about it. For 1,000 years, that was the place. That's what you did to relate to God, to relate to the infinite, to move your life forward, to continue proper worship. You needed a temple, and it was no longer there. Right? It had been destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. And Jews didn't seem to think that they could just build a temple somewhere else. Right? It was not easily replaced. And the rabbis consistently send a very comforting message. And I wanted to bring one version of that. It's from a text on page 48, the top of the page there, from Avot de Rabbi Natan, a text from the, I think, 4th or 5th century. Once Rabban, our Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, a very famous rabbi, left Jerusalem, and Rabbi Yoshua followed after him. And he saw the holy temple destroyed. Rabbi Yoshua said, "Woe to us, for this is destroyed, the place where all of Israel's sins are forgiven." Right? Without a temple, how do we cleanse ourselves? How do we get forgiveness? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "My son, do not be distressed, for we have a form of atonement just like it. And what is it? Acts of kindness. As it says, for I desire kindness, not a well-being offering," a quote from the book of Psalms. And basically, one of the strategies the rabbis developed to cope with a world without a temple was that the way to achieve forgiveness was to be kind to other people, to do good deeds to other people, namely things like helping the sick, visiting the sick, comforting mourners, helping people get married who don't have enough money to afford to get married, clothing people who don't have enough clothing. A lot of the things that this synagogue I know is excellent at doing, but it's not just that those are good deeds. We all know those are good deeds. But those actually, that's how we atone. That's how we make up for the other things we did. Now, it doesn't mean that you get to do bad things and then just give some tzedakah. That's not what the story is saying. But you don't get a chance. You're not supposed to do bad things in the hope that you'll just do good things to make up for them. But we all make mistakes. And one of the ways of making up for the mistakes that we make and for the sins that we do is to compensate for them by doing more and more good deeds. And it's a beautiful message. In general, the rabbis found 3 alternatives for the temple. Study, which is a major part of Jewish practice for thousands of years. Prayer, right? And acts of loving kindness, tzedakah, gimilut chasadim, acts of righteousness. And those are like the pillars, right? Those are the three things that our religion still stands on till this day. Okay, we're going to continue. We're going to do a little bit of the longer, right? It's called vidui. That means confessional on page 49. What we're going to do is we're going to read the first part in English. We're going to stand up again, and then we'll sing the concluding line, which is sort of in bigger font on page 50. And we're only going to do the first paragraph tonight. There'll be more opportunities tomorrow, so don't worry about that. So let's read this in English, but again, we'll do the beating of the heart each time. Let's read together. For the sin we committed before you under compulsion and willingly, and for the sin we committed before you by callously hardening the heart, for the sin we committed before you inadvertently, and for the sin we committed before you with an utterance of the lips, for the sin we committed before you openly and secretly, and for the sin we committed before you in sexual immorality, for the sin we committed before you through misuse of our power of speech, and for the sin we committed before you with knowledge and with deceit, for the sin we committed before you by improper thoughts, and for the sin we committed before you by cheating a fellow man, for the sin we committed before you with mere verbal confession, for the sin we committed before you by joining in a lewd gathering, for the sin we committed before you intentionally and unintentionally, and for the sin we committed before you by insufficient respect for parents and teachers, for the sin we committed before you by using coercion to harm others, and for the sin we committed before you by desecrating the divine name, for the sin we committed before you with foolish talk, and for the sin we committed before you with impurity of the lips, for the sin we committed before you with the evil inclination, and for the sin we committed before you knowingly and unknowingly. Let's sing together in the middle of page 50.
Ve'al kulam Eloha selichot slach lanu mechalanu kapelanu.
All right, we're going to continue with Avinu Malkeinu. We're going to do just the last part on page 52. I think I need someone to open the ark again. Another volunteer? Oh, thank you very much. We're on the last part of 52. I didn't translate these. I just put the transliteration. But what Avinu Malkeinu means, grant us mercy, answer us, for we don't have good deeds to be worthy. Do for us tzedakah, righteousness, and redeem us. That's the last paragraph on page 52 on the top.
Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Choneinu Vaneinu, Ki ein banu maasim. Aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed ve'yoshienu. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed ve'yoshienu.
All right, Kaddish Shalem, you can remain standing, page 52.
Yitkala v'gara shemei rabba Be'alma divrach chirutei v'amlich malchutei Be'chayachon v'mechon uv'chaydecho beit Yisrael Ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru Amen Yehi shmei rabba mevorach Le'olam le'amaya Yitzbarach Yitzbarach v'ishtabach V'yitzbar v'yitzram v'nasei Vitadar vitalal vitalal shmeidu kushabarechu Leilo leila mikol berchata v'shirata Tush b'chata v'nachamata Dal miram b'mavimru Amen
Amen.
Titkabal tzot v'oton d'chol beit Yisrael Kodam v'hon d'vishmai v'imru Amen
Amen.
Yesh lama rama min shamai v'chaim Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen
Amen.
Oseh shalom yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen
Amen. you may be seated. We'll do the Ein Keloheinu, bottom of page 52.
Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Mi Cheloheinu, Mi Chadonenu, Mi Chemalkeinu, Mi Chemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Emalkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shitfiru Avoteinu, Lefanecha Et Ketoret Hasamim. All right, before we move into the Aleinu, we're going to finish up in a couple minutes. Are there any more questions? Anything people wanted to add in? Yeah? Why do we wear a talit at night? I don't really know. I know it's a custom. I don't know. It's generally speaking, tzitzit, right? These are the tzitziot, the fringes, are only supposed to be worn during the day. So, and generally speaking, traditionally, people would wear them like either a small one under their garment, you've seen those, or the larger one over your garment. Yom Kippur, the services begin when it's still day. You might have noticed that. We begin early. Sometimes we begin early on Shabbat too, but that's sort of just for convenient reasons, because in the summer, Shabbat can be late and we don't want to wait that long. But Yom Kippur by design, Kol Nidre is supposed to be said before nightfall. So I think it's attached to the idea of that, like, it's still day and that's when we're gathering together. It's not night yet. But we gather, Jews pray 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And in the afternoon prayers, it's not, which are always during the day, it is not customary to wear the talit. But I knew someone was going to ask that, and I said to myself, I should look it up before I come, and I didn't. So I will have an answer eventually, but I can't look up things. I don't use the computer on Yontif, so you'll have to come back next year. I'm not making a vow. I make a promise, but you know that I just annulled all my promises, so I don't know what it's worth.
You mentioned it with translations.
Yeah.
Repentance, charta, or
Tshuva usually means repentance. That's how we translate that. Tarta? Charata is regret. Right. So hitcharet or charata is to have regret. So when you regret something, that's an expression of you, like in the Kol Nidre, you saw that there. I regret the vows that I took. Right. There are 2 words in Hebrew that play a lot. Tshuva comes from the word to return. Right. It means that you want to return to a state where before you had done wrong. And then the other word comes the other direction is kapara, atonement, which I actually read today comes originally from the word at one. I never knew that before today. But it's not a perfect translation, but it's more of like cleansing. We ask God for kapara, for cleansing from the things that we've done. Atonement is probably as close as we can get in English. Cleansing sounds a little too much like cleaning your kitchen or something like that. So atonement is usually the words. Those are, and they come from a little bit of a different direction. Like we do tshuva, we repent, we try to go back to a better way we used to be, and we ask for atonement or forgiveness, but real cleansing, and I think that word probably is powerful. Like it literally cleans us of those things that we did wrong. Like if you could picture a real spiritual cleansing, but really I think the image of like literally soap almost. It works for me. Obviously, it's not physically possible to do that, but it's an image that works for me. All right, we'll continue this conversation tomorrow. We're gonna do Aleinu, we'll do Mourner's Kaddish, and then Yigdal, and then I'm letting you guys go. And then tomorrow, 11 o'clock. But I will be here at 10:30. If people have other questions that you want to talk about, anything, if there's things in the service that you need better explanation for. Sometimes with this many people, there's not that many people, it's hard to answer everything. Sometimes people might be a little shy to ask a question. I'm happy to be here from 10:30. If no one comes, I have a book and I'm happy to read. So you don't have to feel obligated to show up at 10:30. But at 11, we will begin. We try to begin on time and end at 12:30 tomorrow. Okay, and so on page 53, Aleinu, please rise.
Aleinu leshabech ladon hakol, latetz gedula leyotze bereshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol amonam, ve'anachnu korim mishtachavim umodim, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו עינות, אמת בקנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום, וישב אותה אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת עינות. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
If you're reciting Mourner's Kaddish, please stay standing. If you're not, you can sit or stand as you like. Mourner's Kaddish on page 53. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah. Be'amah divrach yirutei v'yamrich malchutei. B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agara uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabah mevorach elam umeh omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. Vidadar, vidalel, vidalal, shmei de kudeshat berichu. Le'ira u're'ira min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shrama rabba min shamaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Conclude with the Yigdal on page 54.
יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח, נמצא ואין אל מציאותו, אחד ואין יחיד כייחודו, נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו. אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף, לא נערוך אליו קדושתו, קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא. ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו. הינו אדון עולם לכל נוצר, יורה גדולתו ומלכותו. נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו. לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד נביא ומביט את אמונתו, תורת אמת נתן לעמו על יד נביאו נאמן ביתו. לא יחל יפעל ולא ימיר דתו, לעולמים לזולתו, צופה ויודע סתרנו,
מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו. גומר איש חסד כמפעלו, נותן לרשע רע כרישתו. ישרח לקץ ימין וישליכנו, לפדות מחכה קץ ישועתו. מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו, ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו. מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו, ברוך הדעת שם תהילתו. Yasher koach to Sammy Moses. Thank you everybody for coming. Everyone should have an easy and a meaningful fast. And I'll see everybody back tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Oh, one last announcement. Come on. Huh? Oh, there are Israeli bonds outside the door. Yes? And if you can, fold these up and bring them back to the front so that we have them all for tomorrow. Thank you very much. Laila Tov. Shikah.
Thank you. It's really good. Best of both worlds. This is really, Chicago did a really great job. So thank you. Thanks, Rabbi. That's great.
Thanks. See you tomorrow. The Bible that we use up here.
There's a placeholder for yesterday, so you're going to do yesterday. Okay. And is there any time we have to do or like for real? So if I want, I just got to go to the service, which is always empty. Okay.